Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to keep talking about my current project, which is coding the combat system for a game which a viewer of the channel is making. In my last video, I finished off talking about initiative, and the next thing I wanted to look at was weapons and how to store the information about the different characteristics that different weapons have in the game. And if you know a little bit about tabletop and computer role-playing games and a little bit about programming, you might think, as I thought, that this would be very straightforward. You might think, well, you just get a two-dimensional array. So, for example, one slot would probably be the name of the weapon, and then you might have another one for cost, another one for damage, maybe one for range, and then depending on the system you might have slots that deal with whether particular classes can use that weapon. You might have slots that deal with the minimum attributes required for a weapon. So in particular systems you might need a certain strength to use a longbow, for example. But, you know, whatever it's needed, it would probably seems like it's pretty straightforward. But in reality, you can often run into problems that, in fact, often weapons have more than one possible use. So, for example, let's imagine a zombie apocalypse setting, and let's say you have a rifle. Well, you can probably shoot with that rifle, and it probably has a certain range and does a certain amount of damage. But you can probably also use it as a club, in which case it probably doesn't do as much damage, but it's probably still better than just having bare hands. And of course, shooting it probably consumes one bullet, but using it as a club doesn't. So you need to encode the details of both of these attacks. And if you were thinking about it as a two-dimensional array and you just had a single slot for does it use ammunition, well, obviously that's not going to be adequate, because the answer is that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, or with one attack it does and with the other attack it doesn't. So there's probably several solutions to this, but the solution that I have found is to split the details of each weapon into two sets and to have a separate array for each of those two sets. And specifically what I did was I have an array for the characteristics of weapons that don't change with the different attacks, and then another one for the characteristics of weapons that do change with particular attacks. So for example, a pistol, you might be able to shoot with it or sort of hit somebody with it, but it's still called a pistol in both cases, of course. And so the name of the weapon is going to go in that first type of array, the array of the characteristics that don't change. But then the damage that it does when you're shooting with it and when you're hitting somebody with it is going to be different, and the range is going to be different. So damage and range would go into that second sort of that second array for the second sort of characteristics that are variable by attack. So as you can see here, I've got a list of all of the weapons that are used in this particular game. I won't go through each one, but you will probably notice that more than half of them have more than one attack. So a lot of hand-to-hand weapons like the machete, notice there that there's machetes are divided into sort of sharp machetes and blunt machetes, because it was a little bit confusing what the document that I'm going off said, but it seemed to be saying that it does more damage if it's sharp. So that's why there's two. A lot of those can also be thrown in an emergency, and a lot of pistols and guns type weapons you can sort of use them as a club, use them to make hitting someone more effective, or in this case hitting giant mosquitoes, because that's the theme of the game. and it also has attributes like what ammunition it uses, if any, and whether it is one or two-handed. So that page, that display, probably won't appear in the game. That's just a little thing that I made to prove to myself and to be able to demonstrate that I had stored this data in a way that I can that it can be looked at and what's the word, retrieved and used. So let's now have a look at the code, and we're only going to be looking in two places: initialize, where we have the new variables, and list weapons, which is the page where we display the weapons. I'm not going to go through this in great detail because it's fairly straightforward once you know how the information is stored. It's really just a table which then goes through each weapon and displays all of its characteristics. These pages here all deal with initiative, and while we are going to need that in the future, probably quite soon, we don't need it for this. It's nothing to do with the details of weapons. So we have two main new variables, which are the arrays, the two arrays that I talked about, one dealing with the characteristics that don't change, and one dealing with characteristics that do change. And we have a sort of less important one as variable as well. The less important variable, let's deal with that first, is called range, $range, and it is the way that this game works is it doesn't say there's a giant mosquito 50 meters away from you or 30 feet away from you or whatever. Instead, it has sort of bands of range. It'll say that it's close to you, or it's at sort of mid-range, or it's at far range. And all that the range array does is give names to these different bands of range. So we can then use numbers down in these arrays, and it will know that 0 means close, 1 means mid, and 2 means far. So the two main arrays, we have $WEA_OVR, which means weapon overview or weapon overall. And if we look at a given slot, we can see mosquito racket or broom or knife. Well, so slot 0 is obviously the name. Slot 1 seems to be a sort of little brief description. So those two are fairly obvious, but then we have a couple of numbers. So what do they mean? Well, the first number, the number in slot 2, is the number of ways to attack with this weapon, which in this game is only either 1 or 2, but this system wouldn't need to change if we had a weapon that had more attacks. Imagine, for example, we were doing a martial arts themed game. We might have sort of 6 or 7 ways to attack with a staff, for example. And we wouldn't have to. We just have to have more slots in this second array that we're going to use. And then the second, that's the first number. The second number is the number of hands needed to use this weapon, i.e., is it one-handed or is it two-handed? We would need to change the system if we had ever had a weapon where one attack was one-handed and one attack was two-handed. I mean, you can imagine that, for example, if you had a sword or particular types of weapon, you might say a spear. You might say that a one-handed attack with a spear is going to be less powerful than a two-handed attack with a spear. I don't know if that's true, but you might put that in your system. So if you choose to have a shield, you can still poke with a spear, but you'll be doing less damage. And in that case, we would need to change this system. We'd probably need to have handedness. Perhaps we'd need to store it in, instead of this array, which is the unchanging characteristics, we'd need to store it down here instead. But in this case, every weapon is, if it's got 2 attacks, they use the same handedness. So let's look at the second array, WEA_ATT, which stands for weapon attack. And the first thing you'll notice is that we don't have numbers in where we're setting the data here. You don't have to use numbers for arrays, it's more usual. But there you don't have to, and sometimes it's better not to, because then you can do particular things with attributes to find the slot. You can use text, and that's what I've done here. We've got mosquito racket 1, broom 2, knife 1, shovel 2, and of course you'd probably guess, well, broom 1 and broom 2 are probably the 2 attacks that you can do with a broom. Shovel 1 and shovel 2 are probably the 2 attacks you can do with a shovel. And of course, yes, that's what it is. So we've got 4 or sometimes 5 slots. We've got a text, 3 numbers, and then if it appears at all, the last one is also text. So the first slot where it says hit, stab, slash, whatever, that's just the name of the attack. That's what you're doing. It's you slash with the machete, or you ignite the flame spray, or you shoot with the shotgun, or whatever. Then we have 3 numbers, which are the maximum range of the attack as per the range array. So if that number is 1, then we can look in the range array and see that slot 1 is mid. So 1 means that it can be used at mid-range or close range, because every number, you can also use it at closer ranges. You just can't use it at further ranges. The second number is the damage add of this attack. The way that in some games you'll have different numbers of dice for damage, or you might have different size of dice. So this one does a D4, and this one does a D6, and this one does a D8. In this one we have an addition. You're going to make a damage roll, which will be the same every time, and then you'll add a different number to it to account for the greater effectiveness of a bullet over a knife or something like that. There is a complication, which is that there are some, and it's written here in the comments, in the case of attacks which consume 1 to 6 ammunition, see below, this amount is per ammunition consumed. So what that means is there's a couple of guns where you can do like a sort of spray attack. Like you can imagine a machine gun. You could sort of pull the trigger and do a single kind of shot where you're kind of aiming, or you could sort of just wave it and spray it, sort of thing. Some weapons have that option. And if you do that, it'll consume, instead of a bullet, it'll consume 1 to 6 bullets, and the add will be multiplied by the number of units of ammunition that are consumed. So if it's got an add of +2 and you consume 4 bullets, well, that's an add of +8. I think that's how it works anyway. And then we have whether the attack uses ammunition. So 0 is striking with the weapon. So that's like a club or pistol whipping with a pistol, something like that. Obviously that doesn't use up the weapon. Now, in the long term, of course, it does. If you keep stabbing with a knife, eventually the knife will get blunt and you need to sharpen it and stuff. But, I mean, that's in a game with more detailed simulation, you might have that sort of thing. You might also have a chance that weapons break. I don't think this game has either. If you have a knife, the game takes place over a fairly short amount of fictional time. In the fiction of the game, it's not months or years. It seems to be only sort of a matter of hours. And so if you've got a knife, you'll have a knife for the rest of the game. So that's 0. 1 is the opposite. It's a one-use thing. If you throw a spear, you don't have the spear anymore. Now, does that mean that I can, if I throw a spear, can I then, I mean, not that there's a spear in this game, but if I throw a weapon, can I then go over to where the weapon is and pick it up and use it again? I don't know if that's possible yet. I have to look at the rest of the rules. But basically, once you throw it, if this is the value in that slot, it means you don't have it anymore. And then the other option is that it's sort of halfway between the two, which is that it uses ammunition. And this is how, for example, a bow works. If you don't have an arrow, you can't use the bow. When you shoot a bow, that uses up an arrow, but it doesn't use up the bow. You still have a bow. And then we have, and of course guns work in much the same way when you're shooting them. And then we have the variant of that where it uses up 1 to 6 units of ammunition and increases the damage if you use up multiple units. And then finally, if necessary, if this slot has a value of 2 or 3, meaning that it has ammunition, then it's a bit of text telling you the name of the ammunition. So shotgun shell, 9mm, energy cells for the advanced sort of futuristic gun, and so on. And so that's how we store the information. You have one array for the characteristics that don't change, and then one array for the characteristics that do. And when we're dealing with the characteristics that do change, we name the slots pistol 1, pistol 2, etc., or whatever the name of the weapon is, so that we can access the relevant slot just by getting the name of the weapon plus a space plus the number of the attack. So I'll deal very briefly with displaying them, although this isn't, there's not much new here. It's really just a table, and we go through a loop which goes from 1 to the length of WEA underscore OVR. Note that this continues as long as Z is less than that length, not less than or equal to. We do that because when we're dealing with an array, you can also use this dot length. You can do this for text as well. But when we're dealing with an array, it will look at the slots. It will say, what is the highest slot that has a value? It's slot 14. And because it assumes that everyone starts from slot 0, it will say, oh, well, the length of this is 15. And so that's one more than we need. I don't want to go up to 15. I only want to go up to 14 because I don't like to use slot 0. I find it a bit counterintuitive a lot of the time. And then we just have the weapon name. Notice that this cell has a col span of 4, meaning that it's 4 cells wide because it's a... well, this one... Yeah, no, it's a fairly long bit of text because it has the name of the weapon, and then it also has the handedness of the weapon. Then we have, very similarly, we have the description. Then we go through all of the attacks for a given weapon, so that'll only be 1 or 2. We're going to be looking at this where the slot is, and where the slot is the name of the weapon plus a space plus a number. So that'll give us something like shotgun space 1, something like that. And we're going to be looking at that slot a lot. So instead of calling it each time, we just store that in the variable x. And then we print the name of the attack in italics, the range, and we don't use the actual value that's in the WEA underscore ATT array. We get that numeric value and then look at that slot in the range array, which is the one with the close, mid, or far. Then we have the damage, and if it's a sort of attack which uses up one, if it's a sort of spray attack, then we say, instead of saying +4, we say +4 per bullet or per shell or something like that. As a side note, I'm not sure you can do this with shotguns, but you know, anyway, I didn't make up the details of these weapons. I'm just going off the document that I was given, and honestly, I don't know much about it. I had the idea that you could maybe shoot with a double-barreled shotgun. You could maybe choose to shoot 1 shell or 2, but not more than that. But anyway, the other thing to note is we're using that .2 lowercase bracket in bracket, which just gets rid of the initial capital letter. If there is one, it turns it into a lowercase letter, just because that looked a bit more natural. And then we have the ammunition, which if it's thrown, it says it's thrown. If it's just a hand-to-hand one, like a club or something, it doesn't say anything. If it uses ammunition, it tells you the name of the ammunition. And then if it's a spray attack, it specifies in brackets after the name of the ammunition 1 to 6 per shot. So it'll say something like 9mm 1 to 6 per shot, and then we just close all that off. And at the end of each weapon's details, we have this row that has nothing in it but a line break, just to create an empty line to separate the different entries and make it a bit easier to read. And that is how we do that. I've stored all the details. I've made that, as I say, this list of weapons, this page where I list all the weapons probably isn't going to be used in the game. It's just to demonstrate that I can extract the data and get the correct numbers, sort of thing. What I'll be doing in future videos is continuing on with sort of combat proper, probably dealing with setting up where everyone is in terms of range. As I said before, it's not exact, so we don't say the monster is X meters away or X feet away. We just say whether they're close, mid, or far. So that's probably what we'll be doing next. For now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.